Welcome, everyone, to the weekly Wrangle. This week, I'm excited to have Christian Gallagher join me today. Christian is a fantastic VFX artist. I've had the pleasure of working with him on a couple of CG Forge projects. He's a great guy, and I'm excited to have him here. So welcome, Christian. It's good to see you, man.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so I want to kick things off right off the bat and talk about a little bit about like your background and specifically where you are now and how you got to where you are now.
hmm
I'm sure people are
Yeah,
curious
for
about
sure.
that.
You start where I'm at now, kind
Yeah,
of.
where you're at now and what led to where you're
Cool.
at.
Yeah, so right now I'm an effects lead at Zoic Studios, and I've been with them for the past 5 years and just kind of worked up from like regular artist. Before I joined them as a staff member, I freelanced for them, and they were kind of like my primary client when I was freelancing. I'd come in for like 3 months, leave for like 8 or 9 months. They'd bring me back for another 3 month stint for a specific project, usually at a time. And then before that, besides freelancing at other companies, I started my career, as a lot of people did in the industry, at like MPC. So I started at MPC LA. And before that, I was at going to the Savannah College of Art and Design. And that kind of started the whole visual effects trajectory. But yeah, going on, it'd be 9 years since I entered the industry. And yeah, it's been pretty fun.
Nice. It sounds like it's been a fairly gradual process. Like starting, was NPC the first thing or first place you went to right out of school, or did you kind of bounce around a little bit first?
Yeah, I was lucky to get a junior like staff position at MPC right out of school. And so I stayed with them for about a year and a half, 2 years, before kind of breaking off on my own and going into the freelance market. And so it was cool to really get my feet wet with like industry standards. We were working, NPCLA at that time was all commercial work. And so it was like quick turnarounds. And really quickly, it was just like trial by fire. You were thrown into projects where you're like basically completely on your own, and you just had to figure it out. And so that worked really well. And there's a good group of guys there that like left me a lot of files. But pretty shortly after I'd started there, a lot of them had gone to other companies. So I was 3 months out of college, and all of a sudden, the only staff effects artist at MPCLA. And
Nice.
so that trial by fire really helped, I think, accelerate, because I was probably given shots that I wouldn't have otherwise been given as a 3 month out of college artist and needing to figure it out.
Yeah.
Worked.
Absolutely. I feel like a lot of people, when they really start getting their chops polished is when they get thrown right into the fire. And on one
Yeah.
hand, I think it's a very stressful way to learn, but on the other hand, it's also very effective from my understanding. Like when you have a tight deadline and maybe you haven't messed around with flip that much at that point, or at least not to
Yeah.
the degree that the shot needs, then it's like, oh crap. And you're just kind of juggling anything and everything to just make something past the finish line, you know?
That's 100% how the experience has been. And that's why I think when you're learning things, it's like the project-based learning is so effective, because you're just like figuring it out on the fly, and having a deadline is really helpful, because you'll start finding connections that might not have been there otherwise.
Hmm. Yeah, and I imagine too, when you're running like that, inevitably you have to keep a cool head. And that's actually one
Mhm.
thing that I've been thinking about a lot more lately is, what are those sort of like aspects of one's personality that needs to be aligned to meet those tight deadlines and to, I guess, thrive the most in that high pressure environment. And I feel like keeping a cool head is a big one, because the minute you have a stressful deadline and you feel like your job's on the line and you don't know much about a topic, I think
Yeah.
most people, they dive straight into panic mode. And then when that happens, you get a million no's just being thrown down and you're trying everything against the wall. But I've found that it backfires when you kind of get into that really quickly. It actually makes everything worse. So taking your time and keeping a cool head, is that something that is that a skill that you've developed over time, and is that something that people should really pay attention to if they're in that situation?
Yeah, 100%. Because I think, especially with dynamics tasks, effects tasks, we're using Houdini in general. There's so many ways. There's 1,000 ways to do anything, and so it's really easy to get overwhelmed, especially when you're like under a deadline. It's like, okay, I don't have time to explore 1,000 different ways. And so being able to keep that composure, and for me, the skill that's really come down to it is like, okay, what are the three things we can do in this next version to push this forward, rather than getting caught up where it's like, we know we have 100 things to do before we deliver a certain shot. But if you can just like take small steps, and it's like being able to keep your composure and be like, okay, like I know the detail on this whitewater is going to be really important, but maybe let's not do a 6-hour simulation right now before we figure out the timing of like when the wave hits the boat or something specific like that, where it's like you have to almost be okay showing like quicker versions, and almost using that like 80-20 rule, where it's like, what is the most important thing to focus on right now, and not getting caught up in all the small details, has been a skill that I think has really helped me through time, where it's like I can keep the conversation moving. And then in addition to the composure aspect of it, I think just really developing communication skills has been huge for me. It's like, how can you sit down? How can you understand the 2D side of things when it's like you're talking to a compositor? It's like, what do they need? Can you communicate? And can you kind of bring enthusiasm and positivity to a project? Because it's tough when you're up against, you have 3 days to deliver. I mean, I've been in situations where we're like 2 or 3 days from airing, and you're up against the wall to really get things figured out. And how can you keep that composure? How can you stay positive? How can you bring the enthusiasm to actually move things forward? Because we have really cool jobs, and it's easy to get bogged down with it. But if you kind of like get upset or frustrated and stuff and bring that into that loop, it slows things down a lot. And you really have to focus on creating the environment that is going to allow you to create the best work that you possibly can. So yeah, those are some of the skills that I think are really important.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, something that happens is if one person starts crashing out and they start freaking out, that kind of spreads like wildfire to everyone else. And so I think it's super important for people to focus on that particular aspect. You know, another thing about it too is this is, I think, a big difference between someone who is an artist and someone who is a developer, or someone like, it's good to have the technical skills and it's good to tinker around, but at the same time, when push comes to shove, it's a different mindset when you have shots to deliver. And that's something that I think sometimes goes underappreciated by folks that haven't been in the pressure cooker yet, or haven't spent a lot of time in the pressure cooker. And that's one of the things that I sometimes say is like, well, what's the difference between an artist and a developer? A lot of it's the expectations and the cool-headedness you have to keep, while at the same time being light-footed and having fun and everything that you mentioned, you know?
Yeah.
Well, so another thing that was interesting is, so you went from NPC and then you went to freelancing. That jump, I think for a lot of people, is very frightening and somewhat mysterious. Like, how the heck do you go from working for someone, having a stable salary, to, you know, jumping out the window and, you know, flying as a freelancer? That I think is a very mysterious thing for a lot of people. So, I mean, how did you make that work? What was that like when you first made that move?
It was interesting, yeah, because I mean, it was a pretty stable like position at NPC at the time, and so it was a little scary to take that big jump. But I think for me, and at the time was like 24, yeah, I was probably 24, maybe 23 when I did that, and so I didn't have a lot of other costs. Like, I had my rent, and what had actually happened was a friend had invited me up to like the mountains in California to go work on a like video documentation project instead. And so I could go live up there for, I ended up living there for 3 months. And so I had that opportunity and I kind of saw, I was like, okay, I think my time at NBC is kind of ending. And fortunately, because I was the junior artist, but I was the junior artist with like the most seniority, all the other freelancers, because at that time we had lots of freelancers coming through NPC. I built this really cool network because they came in and they'd work on like one project with me, and I was able to kind of help them navigate our pipeline because I'd been there. But they were way more senior, talented artists than I had ever had, and they kind of started to show me the ropes of. I would always ask them like, how do you guys freelance? How does freelancing work? What are holds? What are like second holds? How do you kind of negotiate? What prices do you guys charge? Like there were certain like Houdini groups where they kind of would all communicate about what the prices they were charging would be. And so that kind of network, which we can talk about more later, but I think networking and talking to people all the time is a huge like skill set that's really important too. But building that network up really helped me feel comfortable going out into that and asking people. It's like, okay, what? Like I had a friend just tell me, he's like, if you go to this company, don't take less than this amount. Mm-hmm. And that's super helpful because it helped tremendously because I probably would ask for like half of that at that time.
Yeah.
Which is great. Which is crazy to make that jump too.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was like I had this kind of unique opportunity to sublet out my apartment in LA. So I didn't really have too many fixed costs. I was able to save up over that like 2-year period. And I just kind of waited until that first opportunity came. And once it kind of got in the door, and the freelance market's a little bit different right now. I'm sure it will kind of swing back around at some point. But once it was kind of open, word kind of gets around, or because you worked with one artist at one place and then they're over at another place, they'll pull you over. And in the visual effects industry, it's not a huge industry. And so those relationships are really important because someone you worked at with this company all of a sudden works over at this company. And as a freelancer, you kind of navigate through all of that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that exactly answers the question of taking that jump, but
that's exactly it. I mean, I think from what I understand, and every single freelancer I've talked to, it is kind of this somewhat messy, improvised situation for a minute. Mm-hmm. But one thing that you mentioned is that you networked beforehand and you got to meet people beforehand. So it's not like you just woke up one day and said, I'm a freelancer, and you didn't know anyone or you didn't have anyone that you can email. I think that's one thing people should think about. If you want to be a freelancer, the work for that starts potentially years ahead of time. Ideally years ahead of time, when you're trying to get people's contact info, work successfully with them on a project, build friendships across the industry, and really, like you said, practice those social skills. And I know some people listening hear that, and it instills a degree of terror because you have to break out of that introverted shell that I think so many VFX artists have, which, makes sense. Like, this particular industry, this job attracts introverts. But at the same time, I found that being introverted does not necessarily equal an excuse to not work well with others or be offish towards other people. I know people that are very introverted, and at the same time, they're very socially graceful and they are nice towards others. And I always tell people who have this social anxiety that you just have to think beyond yourself, and you have to think about the team, and you got to think about other people and prioritize them. And that's going to make you a lot more likable, and that's going to make you the kind of person that others want to work with. And it really doesn't have to be so difficult or fancy if that's where your priorities lie, ultimately. And yeah, it sounds like in a lot of ways that was the case. You had some projects that you needed to go well and successfully on, and you collaborated, and then what do you know? You have a
Yeah.
new friend. That
Well,
kind of thing.
and then I think that's the way it happens too. Is like you're working alongside these people, and it's different now that it's more remote. But I think
Yeah.
there's still the opportunity for that, where it's like the conversations don't always have to be about work. Like
Yeah.
you can get to know people on a personal level. And when I was at NPC, it was like hanging out with the supervisor until like 2 in the morning, and it's like we're chatting about things and we're having
Yeah.
an interesting time. At least maybe we're not having fun, but because it's 2 in the morning, but
Yeah.
we're having a good time, and we're talking about life, and we're talking about all these other things. And so I mean, talking about the work is one thing, and working well with others, but
Mhm.
you have to realize people are people too,
Yeah.
and getting to know them. And I mean, with that supervisor, I went to like Thanksgiving with his family then, and like you make these really cool, and there's still like some of the more persistent friendships that I've had throughout my adult life,
Yeah.
are those work relationships and those people that you're working with. And so that helps a lot too, where it's like, oh yeah, of course, like if I'm working on a cool project, I want to bring my friends in on
Right.
that cool project too. And similarly, if it's like if you're new to the industry, I think it's not being afraid to reach out to people. And it's like at visual effects artists, they're busy, so maybe you have to reach out to a few. But I've had people message me on LinkedIn and be like, "Hey, I've been working on this project. Can I like get your eyes on it or 2 cents on it?" And having that give and take, where it's like if you're looking to grow in the industry, where you could like, I'm surprised more people don't almost like
Hmm.
message more, where it's like, hey, like this is a cool project I've been working on personally. What would you do? And I used to
Hmm.
do that in college, where I think that's what ultimately connected me with the MPC LA. Was there was a guy who was a few years older than me, and he'd gone off to MPC LA, and I was working on like some smoke sim, and I was like, hey, like this is traveling a huge distance in our scene. It was like
Hmm.
a flying ice cream truck on fire, flying like
Yeah.
500 meters or something.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm having trouble with the bounds. And he's like, if you figure out this like wedging, where you kind of, back then they didn't have the sparse solver. And
Hmm.
so you had to do this thing where it's like it created one bounding box, then another bounding box, then another bounding box. And you could kind of distribute those on different machines. And so there was this conversation where was like, if you can figure that out, that'd be really cool. And
Hmm.
that's how we would do it. That's how I do it in the industry. And being able to take that and be like, cool, I'm going to try and execute on that now.
Hmm.
And then take that back and show it to whoever you're talking to. Creates this conversation, whereas I think later when MPC LA, and he actually come back with them to the school, when they were looking to recruit, I think we already have a rapport because we've been talking over email and stuff.
Hmm.
And I've heard that story repeated a number of times of like, that's how people got started in the industry, where they found someone that they were like, eventually became friends with, and they would hop on Zoom to talk, or on
Yeah.
Skype or whatever, to talk about some problem they're trying to solve. And so I think that's the big thing, is not being afraid to kind of put yourself out there. And
Hmm.
if it's just the email, it can just be an email. And if you can find someone who's willing, and not to get discouraged if people, because it's like some weeks I'm working every day of the week, and I don't have time to respond to everything, but I'll always try and get around to it. And it's cool to see.
Yeah. I did the same exact thing. I had a whole email list when I was freelancing, and I
Mhm.
would just I would treat it like a newsletter. Like, hey,
Mhm.
everyone, I'd message them individually. I wouldn't like
Yeah.
blanket message, but I would say, hey, so and so, hope you're doing well. Here is the latest project I've been doing this month. Let me know if there's any projects that you need help with. Would love to hop on anything you might have in mind. Or, hey, I'm available this month. Let me know if there's anything I can help with. And just having that list of people to follow up with. And like you said, most of the time I didn't receive any email back because, people are busy and,
Yeah.
stuff like that. But it really goes a long way. That's actually how I got my gig at Pixar as well. It's every single month I was emailing the recruiter, and I
Mhm.
was just keeping her updated. Really, like, hey, I'm working on this project. Really excited. And then next month, hey, really excited to see this project is done. What do you think? And just kept on doing that and doing that for, well, I don't know, probably a year and a half. And by the
Yeah.
way, like a year and a half of not hearing back. And I think that's where people they do an email or two, they don't hear back, and then they kind of stop. So,
Hmm.
like you said, just that persistence, but just knowing that I'd say perhaps once a month, it's there's nothing annoying about that. And, people they still want to keep track of what everyone else is doing. And at the end of the day, too, you're helping people and they're helping you. So it's a good dynamic to want to build with
Yeah.
other people.
And I think that's something that I think is a bit of a block for people is that fear. It's like, oh, I feel like I'm being annoying to this person, or I feel like, and it's like, I've never felt that when I've received an email or
Hmm.
something. And people ask about a job or something, but when I've been looking for things, yeah, I kind of look at all the companies I've worked for in the past, and even I know like, okay, this recruiter used to work for this company, now he works for this company. I'll just shoot him an email then, or shoot him a message on LinkedIn and just be, hey, I happen to be available for the next like 2 or 3 months. And sometimes you catch where they're looking for someone, but I'd say most 90% of the time you don't.
Hmm.
But if you never put yourself out there, you'll never catch that time where it's like, oh, actually, we're starting up on a project that could really use your skill set right now.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah.
that's, I
100%.
think, the key.
I
Yeah.
completely agree. And I think people would be surprised to know that most people don't do that. And if you do
Mhm.
that, you really do stand out. And I don't know, it's a good idea, I would say.
Yeah, I think it was something I took a little bit of a break from visual effects and was doing like drone videography for a minute there. My wife and I were traveling around the country in a travel trailer, and it was before remote work. I was really pushing companies to allow remote work because I had all my freelance contract or connections,
Mhm.
and they'd message me and be like, "Hey, like, are you available?" I'm like, "I'm available, but I can't come into the office right now."
Mhm.
So I'm good for remote. And I think only one of them back then, this is 2019, actually gave me an opportunity to do that. And I did like a short, like 2 or 3 week contract with them.
Mhm.
But I was really pushing it there. But I was like, oh, I kind of need to do something else. And with the drone videography thing, I would just like walk into businesses and be like, hey, is it cool if I like fly my drone around for a little bit? And I was like, if I film something and you don't like it, you don't have to pay me for it. If I film
Mhm.
something and I edit it together and you like it, like here's the price thing. And getting that skill where it's just like I'm
Mhm.
willing to go in and walk. Most of the time people are gonna say no, or it's not going to convert into a sale, but you
Mhm.
really have to just get yourself out there and build those connections. And I think it applies to the freelancing market too, or just getting your foot into the door for a staff thing. It's like
Yeah.
email people, keep them up. Different recruiters, I'll just be, hey, this is what's going on lately.
Yeah.
I'm not available, but we still have a connection over time.
So the one theme that keeps coming to mind here for freelancing is if that's something you want to do, you almost need to look into entrepreneurship. And also I think another thing is being comfortable with being scrappy for to a certain extent.
Mhm.
Because I think a lot of people it's difficult for them to get into it because they feel like they are a failure if they don't have the big name and the big resume, the big job. And if there's a moment in time where you're living lights and you're going door to door with your drone business or whatever it is, and that I think for a lot of people brings a lot of personal insecurity because you're being scrappy and a lot of people aren't comfortable with that. So I guess if, like you said, or yeah, like you said, it's being scrappy, it's entrepreneurship, it's being cool with being a small time before being big time
Mhm.
with whatever it is. Yeah, and I think that's even a cultural thing to some extent. Like we're all kind of culturally oriented to being the big thing, getting the big job, being the
Mhm.
big resume. But ironically, I think you have to be small for a little while and then probably go back and forth between being small time, medium time before you have even a shot at anything that's a little bit bigger. Most of the time, I'd say it seems to be a recurring theme in people's trajectory.
Yeah, I think having that humility at the beginning of like, okay, cool. Like it's not, maybe I won't be given this like hero shot on some big show, but if
Hmm.
I execute this kind of maybe more simple task really well, that is going to lead into the next thing. And I think realizing that at the beginning, it might not feel like the big things, but the small things are kind of the big things at the beginning.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of people too, they have their dream job at, I don't know, ILM as an example, and they
Mm-hmm.
want to work on the stuff that inspires them, but they don't realize that, maybe the first stop is Paw Patrol, if you're lucky. Paw Patrol.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And maybe even before Paw Patrol, you should try to do some personal projects that are even more humble and yeah, just finding that gradual pathway. I've had friends of mine that have kind of taken a more straight shot to the top to right
Yeah.
out of school, they're going more towards ILM or they're doing the whole Pixar thing, and then they're jumping over here, and they always stay high level. But I find that even if that is you, which is very, very rare, by the way, that's not a common thing at all.
Yes.
The people who build up gradually tend to have deeper roots, and they have more resilience if there's ever a downturn of any kind, and they have to kind of scale down what they're used
Mm-hmm.
to. If you've always been here at the top, it's a lot further down and a lot scarier because you've never been down there. you
Yeah.
know, and I think that trips some people out, and it's just one of those things that just one of those things to think about. Like it's I think great to value that gradual build.
Path.
Yeah,
Yeah.
gradual path.
Well,
Yeah.
and I think it goes back to what you were saying about like if you're interested in freelancing, but I think even in general, I think it's just good to get comfortable with the entrepreneurship side of
Mhm.
things and being scrappy. Where it's like when COVID happened, like there for me there was no work. I'd been freelancing. I had just finished a freelance contract in LA, and then that ended like March 1st. I don't think I had a staff or a consistent freelance thing until October. And so
Mhm.
there was like a big gap there, 7 months.
Mhm.
And what I turned to was like, I set up like an Upwork profile and I was doing tiny little simulations, or I was like taking my visual effects skills and mixing them with like the entrepreneurship where it's like, okay, like time to make a pitch deck. And it's like, I mean, I went from working on like top tier television shows to being like, okay, cool. I'm just going to do like this little startups, like pitch, like VR project for a couple, like 2 weeks. And then gradually I was able to like build up, and it's like, I kept doing projects for small firms, and I was doing projects like from start to finish completely on my own. It's like, it wasn't the top tier, like Hollywood, like TV stuff I'd been working on 6 months before that, but it was income and it was stability, and it's actually really fun to go
Yeah.
through and develop those skills, because the industry recently has just become very specialized, where it's like you do effects, and to kind of return to that and build up the skill sets. Like, okay, now I have to model something. Okay, now I have to shade something. Okay, now I'm going to render it all together. Like
Mhm.
it keeps that scrappiness alive, and it makes the downturns of the industry, because there's a lot of fluctuation in Hollywood, and it makes those downturns not nearly as scary if you feel like you could go out and find something else to do for a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. And I feel like right now, too, the industry in general is returning. Well, I would say for a while, VFX was at a real high where, unlike other artistic professions, you had a lot more stability. You had a lot more of a straight path that you could choose. Whereas now I feel like things are changing to be a bit more in line with what other artistic pursuits look like. So if you're an actor, or if you're a painter, you're a photographer, you're a whatever other type of artist, I think VFX is becoming a bit more like that. And for people that haven't had experience in those other artistic pursuits, the way that a lot of people do it is they have multiple things that provide stability. So, you have your drone business. When I was coming up with CG Forge, this was a very scrappy situation. I actually just took my beat up car all the way out to Nashville, and I had $200, and I was sleeping on someone's couch to like figure it out. And that was kind of my start to all of this. And then when I got there was no plan. There was just kind of I'm hanging out on my buddy's couch. Let's see how far I get. And
Yeah.
from there, I basically just went to every single film VFX studio I could find in town. I was knocking on doors, I was emailing, and I was just trying to find something that could pay a month's worth of rent. And
Mhm.
when I wasn't doing that, I was doing DoorDash. And when I wasn't doing DoorDash, I was trying to play drum set and fill in a couple of gigs that my friends were playing. And when I wasn't doing that, I was trying to find, miscellaneous gigs on the side that, my buddy had going on, making fences or doing whatever the heck it was.
Mhm.
But that's the kind of mentality that actually provides stability, and it's a virtue when you are pursuing something artistic. And I think if you look at the background, the biography of many of the best artists, you find that common theme. At some point or another, you're doing these side hustles and you're doing these other things to supplement your income. And, I think a lot of people listen to that and they say, oh, well, that sucks. But it really doesn't suck. It actually provides, I think, more variety to life, too. It's kind of nice every now and then to not be in front of the computer for 10 hours a day
Yeah.
and to go outside and work with your hands for a bit. And then it gives you a new appreciation when you come back to, working on a computer. And then, just looking for those sort of things as an artist is actually really enriching. And
Mhm.
I think it's not just about money. It's also about those enriching experiences, and that all feeds into your growth as an artist.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. And I think when you go and do other things, it almost gives you fuel for the creative aspects of it. And I mean, and our industry can be really intense too, where it's like you're spending 8, 10, 14 hours a day sometimes if you're against a really big deadline, sit in front of the computer. And I think having the capacity to go do these other things almost like balances your life out a little bit too, where maybe it's like, okay, let's go fix like a weed whacker or some
Yeah.
like random skill where it's like, I didn't know how to do that, but figuring that type of stuff out, there's a similar problem solving, but you take the problem solving you've maybe developed from your artistic things and put it in a whole different domain. And we do a lot of like house renovations and things like that. And I think working with your hands and being out in the world actually creates, at least for me, the environment to create better work when I am sitting down and better focused attention when I'm pursuing the artistic side of things.
Yeah, 100%. Now, I'm curious why. So, a lot of people, there's been a lot of different theories out there as to why VFX and by extension TV and movies have
Mhm.
been in a downturn right now. AI has been a big topic for that.
Mhm.
There are, in my opinion, other things that outweigh AI. But before I give you my opinion on this, what do
Mhm.
you think? Why is it that TV and film is struggling from your perspective?
I think right now, I mean, it's been going on for probably about two years now. Yeah, I think it was about August of 23 was when things, or it was May of 23 was the writer's strike in Hollywood. The writer's strike had a massive impact. It's the second or first, I think it was the second longest writer's strike in Hollywood history. It was over 100 days. And what I hadn't really realized during that time was a lot of the showrunners started as writers. And so they were still in the Writers Guild. And so basically, I mean, Hollywood's just at a full pause. And then halfway through the writer's strike, you have the actor strike happen.
Mhm.
And then finally, they resolved the writer's strike, they resolved the actor strike. And then IATSE, which is like all the behind the scenes workers, like cinematographers, sound engineers, etc. Their contract was up for renewal too. And they ended up not striking. They came to terms before that, but all the big studios was like, we just had to rewrite all our contracts for the past 2 years. Every directors are booking a year or two out in advance usually. And so everyone that was in that slot, they just missed that project. So now they have to find a new director. There's new terms, so they have to rewrite every contract. And so when the IATSE stuff was coming up too, I think all the big studios were like, we're just going to wait until we finish negotiations with that union as well. And so just put Hollywood on a pause for almost a year straight in terms of like actual filming and production. And because a lot of showrunners were part of the Writers Guild, it even stopped post-production, even stuff that had already been filmed, we kind of had to stand down on, other than a select few projects that were outside of the unions.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that had a huge thing. And I think a big part of it is ripples from that. And that's just my unique understanding of it. I'm not sure how much all of that plays in, but I think the ripples from that are still smoothing out.
Yeah.
And then I think in combination of that, you had a big boom during COVID. Like, people couldn't film. There was a lot more visual effects requested. Like, certain seasons of shows we were working on were all of a sudden in space because they could film everything on a volume or a blue screen. And it made it a lot more, it made the demand for visual effects skyrocket, mixed with the streaming wars. Like, that same era was the streaming wars. Like, when I think I first started freelancing for Zoic, back when it was more like cable primetime era, there were probably like 50 to 80 shows produced a year. And I think in 2021, 2022, there were 500 shows produced.
Wow.
Like,
I didn't realize it was that much. Wow.
And so there was just a huge influx of like demand for content. And I think studios stopped like fighting against each other so much. And so I think we've seen a downturn. I don't know what the numbers are recently, but I think there's been I don't think nearly as much content's being produced. So I think that's a big aspect. And then, like you mentioned, I think the potential future of AI coming out. I think a lot of people no longer really understand the visual effects process. Because you see what you could do if you hop on Midjourney or something, and it's like, wow, I created something so cool. It must be that easy for everything else.
Yeah.
And so there's a lack of understanding there of the whole thing. But it like anything, it's multi-layered. But I think the strikes and the streaming wars are probably the biggest thing from me that I've seen. And we keep thinking like, okay, it's going to be better. Like in 2023, it was like, just get to the new year. And then in 2024, it was like, survive to 25. That was the saying. And now 25, at least for me, has been a lot more stable. I went through small periods of being furloughed during 24, which is like completely understandable because there just wasn't work coming through. And again, like, I'm pretty far into my career, and just being able to like turn the freelance like muscles back on for a little bit and pick up some small work to fill in the gaps is really helpful. And I've actually never really stopped behaving like a freelancer. Like, I still run things through a business account, and I set aside a certain amount of every paycheck so that when something like this happens, it's like there's a little bit of a reservoir there, which as a freelancer you have to do. As a staff member, you don't have to do, but I still think it's a smart thing to do. But yeah, so I think kind of deviated from the downturn on film and television a little bit, but it really comes back to there's not as much content being created as far as I can see, and the strikes rippling. So the strike ripples, I think, are starting to balance out a little bit, and I think studios are starting to kind of turn on the engines a little bit, and it seems like things are picking up.
Yeah, I agree. The writers' strike, and the other ripples to that is when, well, first of all, a lot of things come to mind, but you have such a complicated pipeline with film and TV, and there's so many dependencies, and what that means is, like, if one thing breaks, it's not just that one thing that breaks. It's 10, 20 other things down the line that also break. And especially when you have writers, they're at the very front of the whole production, if not at the center of movies and TV, even as it's being developed. And when that breaks down, it causes such a pileup of complications, to your point, that people don't know the beginning of. And the result of that is, I think the reason why TV and film has kind of gone out of fashion is because there hasn't really been that great of TV and film. Like, I think the quality has also gone down in general as a result of all of this. I think there's a lot of film productions that just want to get this thing out of the way because it's been such a train wreck for those couple of years, or, oh, we just got to get this project off the slate. And if that's the mindset of the directors, the producers, of everyone working on it, then I think naturally, inevitably, it leads to quality going down for those productions. And then the ripple effect of that is people are less interested in film and TV. I was seeing, just, briefly, take a look at the size of like the video game industry as opposed to TV and film. And you will be astounded at how much bigger video games is compared to film. It's like, I think film and TV might bring in, and don't quote me on this, it's been a while since I looked at this, like a month or two, but maybe like $8 billion, whereas video games as an industry as a whole brought in $800 billion total.
Wow.
And it's really like almost a factor of 100 that, from what I remember, that even video games is that much more popular. So when people come home at the end of the day, they want some entertainment, they're reaching for video games. And that to me says film and TV is out of fashion at the moment. Now, I think that could come back a little bit more in the future, but definitely if AI and if these other issues get ironed out, and let's say that the rate of production increases and, we're able to be less bogged up, so to speak, I think that there's absolutely a market and potential waiting, even if you did flood it with 500 new shows. And that's something I say all the time. It's like, sure, maybe AI does speed up the process, but at the moment, there's a huge deficit of good shows and good movies that people want to watch. So if AI can help with that, great. Actually, I think it'll ironically help the industry, because right now it's out of fashion and it needs more good shows to prop it up to its potential.
Yeah, so that's an interesting perspective on it. Yeah, and I think it could, where it kind of democratizes, AI can democratize the creation process a little bit, where it's like you can get better quality, or anyone can kind of do it. You don't have to go through so many different layers to create something really cool. And I think there will be a pivot to that, where it's like with a small team, you could create a really incredible show potentially, which is really exciting.
Now, right now, specifically in VFX simulations and what you do with Houdini, where does AI shine and where does AI not shine in how it affects your everyday work as it currently is right now?
I don't know how much about like everyday work right now, but I think the ways that it has the potential to shine. I mean, I think with Houdini 21, we saw them kind of showing some of the things that they're coming out with, like the fluid neural point surface stuff is actually really interesting. The machine learning volume upres they had in their demo too. And I think that's one of the places that it's really going to shine, is we can take and train models on things that have a lot of really unique detail, and then use something that maybe is a little bit lower resolution, and then we run it through some sort of like AI inference and get a lot finer detail. Like I think with the point surface thing, it's like you could feed it a lower res simulation and you'll get all these like kind of micro ripples in there that actually follow. So I think that's one area that's going to shine. One of the areas that it kind of falls short is like it just has a lack of control. Like the specificity that we deliver to our clients is like, it's very specific, and depending on your industry, like commercials get even more specific. If you're in product rendering and stuff, it's very like you couldn't go with the kind of neural noise that you would get from AI or the hallucinations, because you might get a version and you might want to keep everything the same but change one little thing, and you just won't get that. And I think that's a little bit of where the future probably lies. Is it's similar to what we do in Houdini when you're doing like a effect simulation. There's so many inputs and you're running it through, and you can only control certain inputs, and then you put it through the physics of Houdini through like a .NET or something, and then you get something out. And being able to control that hyper specifically, if you're doing a fluid sim, for example, is a complex prospect. And I think, at least what I understand with the AI stuff, it's probably a similar problem. Is like, what inputs can you control and how can you guide it the best? Similar to like doing a dynamic simulation. And I think that there's an interesting parallel there. And I'm curious to see how the AI stuff continues with like people who are kind of Houdini brained. Because I think there's a great parallel there where it's like, okay, cool. Like when I'm doing a Houdini simulation, I can't control for every aspect, but over time, you start to understand the most valuable inputs, and then you control for everything else. And then you're going to run 5, 10, 15 wedges of those important variables and see which one comes out the best. Like you don't have total control when you're throwing things into a physics engine, similar to how you don't have control when you're throwing something into like an AI model. And I've heard it kind of referenced where it's like with the AI stuff, it's you have certain inputs you control for as much as you can, and then it's kind of like pulling a slot machine and seeing what you get out.
Yeah.
And as I think it develops, I think the value will be in figuring out how to control the most inputs and guide it the most. And so what side effects came out with like the machine learning volume upres and kind of the pre-trained models that I think they're shipping Houdini 21 with, it looks like, I think is one of the ways that it's really going to shine in the future, is like not so much replacing things that we're doing, but actually enhancing and adding detail. And then, yeah, there's still a long ways to go, but I think it's a really fascinating field, and I think it's something people should get familiar with, even if you're not interested in pursuing it, just to kind of know what the field is up against. Yeah, because it seems like, I think in a lot of people's minds, AI and traditional VFX are at odds with each other, and I think the only way forward, or the best way forward, is this kind of intermixing of it, where it's like, how can you blend AI techniques with traditional visual effects? And I think that's going to produce the best results. But it's tough to say. It's an ever-changing landscape. It changes weekly.
Yeah,
these days.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think the other thing too that people need to think about is that there's a lot of nuance to the impact that AI has. Like if we're talking about a concept artist, I mean, this is like Armageddon for concept artists. But even then, there's still concept artists out there. And part of that job is dealing, or is working with clients, is figuring out their vision, is creating a customized experience of some kind. And to your point, even for a concept artist right now, there's still some concept artists that are being employed. And the ones that are being employed are, guess what? Using AI, most likely, because it creates such a competitive edge. Now, and the other thing too is I think that with VFX and Houdini specifically, that is a lot more resilient than a concept artist is to what AI does. And it's a totally different ball game. And I think sometimes people, they will look at concept art and Houdini, and there's not much difference between the two. It's all kind of VFX, or it's all kind of the same, but it's really a totally different thing once you start getting into the details of it. But yeah, I totally agree with you. I think enhancing workflows is the best way to use it, and is probably where the most potential lies in all of that.
Yeah, and even utilizing it for learning. Yeah, Houdini too, like not necessarily the generative, like the imagery, but the language models you can use to parse through a lot of documentation really quickly. Or I've been stuck on problems, and at least when I've used it in the past, it doesn't always give you exactly what you need to do in Houdini, but it's opened up new avenues in my brain that would work really effectively if we kind of go down that way. So it's not giving me a step-by-step thing, but broader vision. It's like, oh, and I've learned things that in 10 years of using Houdini, I didn't know. Like, oh, I didn't know you could like, put that channel into a render and have stuff kind of hidden in there. Like there's some cool little things that you can use it for in terms of brainstorming and doing approaches to things.
it's kind of like a super Google search in some ways.
Mhm.
Now, I will say that I have had some students that use AI and it'll give you an answer that sounds like it's correct, but
Mhm.
because the Houdini knowledge is very specific, like once I'll try to think of a good example, but it's like once you start trying to figure out like what's your best advice for this kind of simulation, or it might give you a general outline, but then once you get to an attribute, sometimes it messes up the attribute name, or sometimes it'll say, oh, well, just use this node, but that node isn't the node you want to use.
Yeah.
Or like best practices. Maybe it'll show you something in Vex, but that's like the most complicated way you could possibly do it in Vex.
Yeah.
So I would say like don't think of it as a replacement for your own critical thinking because that's still number one as a Houdini artist. But it should
Oh yeah.
be a companion, another input as you're critically thinking and researching things. And that's where I think it can sometimes really just shine really nicely.
Yeah. I think of it as like I could sit here and do 15 Google searches,
Yeah.
or I could do one AI prompt and get the same idea. Now that they've introduced sources to the responses, a lot of times you can click and actually dive into the source material that it was pulling things from. And so I think that's the way to do it. Yeah. It's not, you're using it to give yourself IQ points, not to replace
Yeah.
you entirely.
Yeah.
And I
Just
think
use it
that's
as
the
a
key.
buff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. So zooming out a little bit,
Yeah.
one thing I'm always curious about is when you look at yourself as an artist, what does success look like for you? Do you know what that looks like? I know it's probably changed over the years, but right now, what does success look like for you? And for anyone that's trying to follow a similar type of success, what advice might you give?
Mhm. Yeah. I think, at least as I've gone through my career and stuff, and I think there's different stages to it. I think when you're starting out, you don't have to, but I think it's helpful to be all in on it. Like, where it's like, sometimes I was working a contract during the day and then doing contracts at night to like just really like take advantage of every opportunity that comes to your doorstep. And sometimes two come at once. And I don't necessarily recommend that for long term, but sometimes you're in this situation where it can be. But that, or it's just like you're on projects that need like a lot of overtime. And I still do a lot of overtime. But I think what success kind of is to me now is this like work-life balance and also maintaining the excitement for what we do, because it is really cool. And I think it's easy to become jaded over time. And so if you can kind of look at different aspects where it's like, if you're happy, like if I'm being social and being out with friends and getting out into nature and also like having fun and learning new things with work, I count that as like a big success. And I think not only does focusing on all those things make you feel better as a person, but I think it also allows you to produce the best work that you can too. So I think that's what I recommend. And I'd probably, even if I go back, I'd probably recommend to myself in the past focusing on that earlier, where it's like, get out and like do things outside of work. Don't get bogged down with like the stress of it, and do things that almost help you disconnect from the work a little bit. That's one of the big challenges of like remote work, is like you can come check on your simulation on Saturday evening and see how it's coming along. And I think having the discipline to kind of segment your life and have these different buckets that you keep filled up help you produce like the best thing. Also just getting enough sleep is like a huge, like if I can get 8 hours of sleep at night, that's a huge success. And seeing friends and doing things during the week other than sitting in front of the computer is what's good.
Yeah.
Make it not only the most fun, but also create the best work. And if you can do both of those simultaneously, I count that as a big success.
Yeah. Completely agree. And ironically, when you're pushing hard and you're burning the midnight oil and you're just you're grinding it, if you do that for too long, you're ironically going to produce less work in the long run, and you're going to produce that work in an unhappy state anyway.
Yeah.
And I think even if your top priority is to place work first, even if that is your priority,
Hmm.
ironically, you want to put other things before work to balance. If you're looking at this thing like a marathon, like, hey, I want
Yeah.
to, continue doing cool things and, with VFX and this and that. So, yeah, I think those are good words of wisdom. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and I think for me, it's like, I think for a long time, anxiety's kind of been the fuel where it's like, okay, I have this deadline coming up.
Hmm.
And that is a very effective fuel to propel you forward. But I think the shift they've been trying to make in the last few years is like, what if you can kind of like leave the anxiety and kind of use enthusiasm
Hmm.
as this like fuel to push yourself forward? And it leaves you in a much more calmer state. And again, yeah, like I'm aiming for the most amount of like focused hours, not the most amount of hours.
Yeah.
Because it's really easy to just be, oh yeah, I worked 15 hours yesterday. It's like, yeah, but if I can produce what took me 15 hours yesterday in 8, like that's gonna be huge.
Yeah.
And if you produce the same amount of things or same quality or better quality, a lot of times I think is what I find.
Well, and that brings us around to the very first thing we're talking about, is keeping a cool head. And
Mhm.
it's all the more reason why that's the best place to be, and that's going to create the least amount of bugs and issues when you're keeping your cool, when you're in the zone, when you're using enthusiasm to fuel you as opposed to anxiety and fear. And yeah, ironically, it's kind of this like positive feedback loop that can happen, or it's going to be a negative feedback loop that happens. You're either
Mhm.
going to be scrambling and you're going to be burnt out, and you're going to be scrambling because you're burnt out. It's going to go in circles like that. Or you can not do that and you focus on the positive loops, and that also has the power to make things go smoothly, have you work more efficiently, and enjoy your work all at the same time.
Yeah,
So really cool.
100%.
That's
Yeah.
yeah. So I think we should all aim for those positive loops. That's
Yeah, that's the goal.
yeah. It's a good goal. Well, thanks again, Christian. It's been a pleasure
Absolutely.
talking with you. For anyone that's interested in following what you're up to, besides the big movie screens and the awesome stuff projects you're on, where can they find your work or keep up with you?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Like I said, like shoot me a message or I can help connect you guys with whoever kind of is around that is focused on what you're focusing on. Or yeah, I think LinkedIn is probably the best place right now. Can give that to you. And yeah, I need to get some social links a little bit stronger.
Oh yeah, no worries. I'll just put it in the video description. So check it out
Awesome.
there if you're interested in following Christian stuff in the future. So thanks again, and until next time, see you later.
Thank you so much.